larger churches that have more ministries, more things, more resources available for them and their family, right? And I get that. Okay. Not against that. But then when death comes, it's oftentimes these smaller churches that end up doing the real ministry to the family. What's up, YouTube family? Pastor Gerald here from the Pastor's Cave. Hadn't done a ministry type video in some time. I have been putting up a lot of sermons from the church that I'm currently serving at. And so maybe you've seen some of them, maybe you haven't. Not many people have watched them, and hey, that's okay. But today, for a few minutes, something's been on my mind, ministry related, and I want to talk about that. And I want to talk about, I think the subject, or maybe the title, and this is totally unscripted, so I will do my normal rambling along, where church members get it wrong, or maybe where the church gets it right. I don't know. I don't know what the best title is, but here's what I've seen over the last couple of weeks. Last couple of weeks, we've had a number of people pass away in our community and in the surrounding area. And one of the things that's always struck me about when a family walks through that time of grief is how a small church does ministry. Now, I want to be careful how I classify a small church. Technically, as a full-time pastor, by Southern Baptist standards, I have never pastored a small church, okay? I think the statistics are something like this. 80% of Southern Baptist churches, somewhere in that neighborhood, run less than 100 people on Sunday morning. So the churches I've served full-time have all ran over 100 people on Sunday morning. But comparatively speaking, or relatively speaking, a church that runs maybe 150 is really not that large of a congregation. Now, you're going to see where I'm going with this hopefully in a minute. So, we have churches in our area that run 300, 400, 500 people on a Sunday morning. So, compared to us, who on a good Sunday, right now probably, we would consider 150 a good Sunday. So, relatively speaking, there are these larger churches. And then, of course, I live in a very rural context, but if you move outside this rural context, and even around here, I know we got one church that's probably 20 miles from us, somewhere in that neighborhood, probably runs 1,200 people. And then when you get into larger areas, you find these churches that run, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6,000 people. And again, just talking about Southern Baptist churches. And there's a great appeal. The larger churches have, usually they have more programs. They have, probably better resources. Obviously, they have more staff. They have more for children and youth and preschool ministry. And so they have a lot of stuff like that. And now, what I'm about to say is not an attack on larger churches. Because I know larger churches try to do what smaller churches already do well. So in a church the size that I pastor, there's a sense of community. We've had some changes here recently with new people coming in, but you're kind of in a context like everybody knows everybody, that small town, kind of mentality, which in my opinion is not a bad thing. And a larger church tries to create that through small groups. So we got, this Sunday school class and this Sunday school class and this discipleship ministry. And you got just all these different things that kind of become, in some sense, a lot of little churches inside of a larger church, if you will. So I get that large churches try to do this. Here's the thing that strikes me, though. We have people in our community, and in all the communities I've ever been in, who attend these larger churches that have more ministries, more things, more resources available for them and their family, right? And I get that. Okay. Not against that. But then when death comes, it's oftentimes these smaller churches that end up doing the real ministry to the family. And by real ministry, I mean the pastor's showing up. Deacons are showing up. Of course, people from Sunday school or just people from the church, they're showing up. They're bringing food. And again, I'm not saying that large churches don't do this, but what I can tell you from experience is I've had people in churches that I have served who left for greener pastures, something that was better for them and their family, which again is fine. But then when tragedy struck, and I can tell this story right now because we're not personally dealing with it at the church I'm at, but there are some other churches around here that have been dealing with it. When tragedy strikes, that smaller congregation is the one that's left to bear the burden, carry the load, make the sacrifices to minister to this family. And might I add, in my experience, most of these smaller churches do that really well. They do it willingly. They do not do it begrudgingly. So, as I think about that, I wonder, is that an issue? So, and by that I mean this. I mean, why do I run off to a church as a member? I'm attending a church and I say, well, I'm going to go here and I'm going to go there. I'm going to go there for my family. It's going to be better for my family. But the question is it? Do you have that sense of community there that you have in these smaller churches? Is that church, is a pastor, somebody on staff, are they going to be there for you when you walk through this time of difficulty, right? I would even go a step further than that, even outside of a time of tragedy or loss. If you're going to a church that you don't have access to the pastor, to me, that's a red flag, right? Now, that don't mean that you can see the pastor today. It doesn't mean that you can see him this week, but you can get an audience with the pastor if you need to see him, right? So he might have, the church may even be big enough that he's got an administrative assistant, and the administrative assistant says, hey, Pastor John he's available at these times next week. Would those times work for you, right? Now again, this is not an attack. I don't want to elevate a small church, and I don't want to tear down a large church, because God is at work in both of those contexts. I see that. But what I would say is, if you're a larger church, make sure that your people are taken care of, right? Don't let that burden, not that they mind it, but don't let that become a burden to this small church, especially this small church that the people that have been coming and supporting your ministry at that church, they left this small church to come to your church, and now in a time of need, this small church is left to, minister to this family. Again, they're not doing it begrudgingly. I don't think the large church necessarily is doing it intentionally, nor the small church begrudgingly. But it's just one of those things that's like, and I really think for members, and probably most of the people watch this, you'll be a member of a church. I mean, there needs to be some sense of loyalty to your church family, right? Too many people today just cut and run when things get a little bit difficult. And they say, I don't want to stay here and argue and fuss with people. Look, I know we shouldn't have to do that in the church. We need to be at peace with one another. We need to be unified as much as it's possible. But we also, I don't think we should cut and run every time things get a little bit difficult, or, we go through a season of transition or whatever the case might be. Now, does God move people to different places at different times, at different seasons of their lives for different purposes? Sure, I believe he does. I think, but as I heard a guy say one time, and he was talking about pastoral ministry, but we shouldn't be running from something. We should be running to something. So yeah, has God called me to go to this place? A lot of times in smaller churches, certainly even ones that are much smaller than the one that I serve at, you'll have a family or two come in and they have some small children, and they'll say, and the case it could be, we're going to go down to First Baptist of Scriven because they got something for the kids. And, the reality of the matter is, and I'm not saying people don't do this, but, the question is, well, you got 2 or 3 kids. Why don't you help start a ministry in that church for the children, right? No, it's not going to be, it's not going to be as high tech and have all the bells and whistles as the big church down the road, but you got to start somewhere, right? Now, I'm assuming in both cases, large or small or even medium churches, these are churches where the gospel is faithfully preached, the word of God is faithfully preached, that you don't, you're not, you don't have a bunch of doctrinal problems in the church, right? And there is a sense of peace, harmony, and love in the church, because quite honestly, if there's division and contention and backbiting and all of that in the church, then it could be you have a leadership problem in the church, and that's a whole different video. But when the people of God are acting ungodly, then it becomes the responsibility of the shepherd, to correct. And that's a hard thing to do. But at the end of the day, the church has to know, if you're going to be in fellowship here, there's a certain standard, right, of conduct and treating one another, that has to be met, right? Not to be a Pharisee or to be legalistic, but to be biblical. So anyway, I get off in a sermon if I start talking about that. So anyway, hey, be wherever God's placed you at. Wherever he's planted you, grow there. And, and just a shout out to the small churches 25, 35, 45 people going above and beyond to minister to people as they walk through times of difficulty. Hey, I'm going to wrap it up here. Appreciate y'all watching. My prayer for you is always the same, that the Lord might richly bless you and that you might see all of your blessings as from him.